Hello and welcome to our latest breaking news. Here are the detailed headlines. Please stay tuned.
The U.S. accidentally gifted Iran a special strategic tool. Former U.S. President Donald Trump once declared the launch of a military campaign to prevent Iran from possessing nuclear weapons. However, according to analysts, it was this very conflict that made Tehran realize they had in their hands an effective doomsday weapon, the ability to control the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz has long been considered a strategic vulnerability. The U.S. was well aware of the risk that Iran could block this waterway if attacked, but Washington did not foresee how easy closing the strait would be, nor the difficulty of reopening it and maintaining stable operations. According to the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, the majority of Iran's fleet has been destroyed. However, Tehran still has the ability to create a high-risk environment that would cause maritime insurance to skyrocket and shipping to grind to a halt. Notably, regional sources say the role of Hormuz in U.S.-Iran negotiations is increasing markedly, as the focus is no longer just on missiles or proxy forces but has shifted to uranium enrichment limits and how to handle the Hormuz leverage. A Gulf source warned that ultimately, Hormuz will be a red line. Before, it wasn't an issue, but now it's different. The goal of negotiations has changed. Closing the Strait of Hormuz has proven relatively easy, but reopening it and maintaining stable operations is much more difficult. Even if the U.S. mobilizes significant resources for this mission, the risk of losses and escalation remains very high, while Iran could retaliate by attacking energy facilities in the region. Establishing escort convoys would also require a broad international coalition. Meanwhile, to restore shipping traffic to pre-war levels of about 130 ships per day, Iran's cooperation is almost a mandatory condition. Even though the U.S. could exert economic pressure by blockading Iranian ports, this does not change the fact that Tehran holds the key to the Strait of Hormuz. Gulf countries worry that current negotiations might only focus on risk management at Hormuz rather than completely eliminating Iran's leverage, thereby inadvertently consolidating Tehran's control over this critical energy shipping lane. In a post on social media platform X, at a time when the U.S. and Iran had just reached a 2-week ceasefire, former Russian president and current deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, frankly stated that it's unclear how the Washington-Tehran ceasefire will unfold, but one thing is certain: Iran has tested its nuclear weapon. That weapon is called the Strait of Hormuz. Its potential is limitless. This shows that Hormuz is being viewed as a strategic deterrent tool that allows Iran to exert pressure without crossing the nuclear threshold. In the context of weakened conventional military capabilities, Iran has long relied on asymmetric deterrence measures such as missiles, proxy forces, and its nuclear program. However, following recent conflict developments, these pillars have been significantly degraded. At that point, controlling the Strait of Hormuz has emerged as a new deterrent option. According to an Iranian security source, Tehran has prepared for years for a scenario of closing the Strait of Hormuz, and this is now one of their most effective tools. The source described Hormuz as an invaluable golden asset derived from a geographic location the world cannot take away, calling it a form of geographic leverage with powerful deterrent effect. Another source close to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, said this strait is like a sword drawn from its sheath, creating a new lever against outside powers. Fake Iranian government messages demand fees to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Shortly after the conflict with the U.S. broke out, Iran imposed a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20% of the world's oil and a significant portion of liquefied natural gas passed daily before the war in the Middle East. Later, to facilitate trade, Iran proposed charging fees for vessels wishing to pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz. According to an announcement by the Greek maritime risk management company Maris, unidentified individuals posing as representatives of Iranian authorities sent messages to several shipping companies whose vessels were stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. The individuals demanded that companies pay transit fees in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Tether to be granted permission to pass through this shipping lane. However, recently, some unidentified individuals posing as representatives of the Iranian government sent messages to several shipping companies demanding payment of transit fees in cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, or Tether for clearance. A message quoted by Maris stated, "After providing the documents and being assessed as valid by the Iranian security agency, we will determine the fee to be paid in cryptocurrency. Only then can your vessel pass through the strait without hindrance at a pre-agreed time." Maris emphasized that the messages were not sent by the Iranian government. These specific messages are a scam. There has been no comment from Tehran. On the 18th, when Iran temporarily opened the Strait of Hormuz, vessels tried to pass, but at least 2 of them, including an oil tanker, were hit by Iranian fire and forced to turn back. Maris believes at least one of those vessels was a victim of the scam. Domino effect from Hormuz turns into a valve-closing chokehold, paralyzing the world economy. 3 strategic shipping lanes, the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Strait of Malacca, could severely disrupt global supply chains, drive up energy prices, and increase the risk of economic recession if prolonged disruptions occur. According to Russia's Sputnik, financial analyst CS Javed Hassan said these are critical corridors where global trade and energy flows converge. Prolonged blockades of these routes could strongly impact energy prices, GDP growth, and employment, and even increase the risk of a global economic recession or crisis. The Strait of Malacca, narrowest at about 2 kilometers and often congested, accounts for roughly 20 to 25% of energy flows and 25 to 30% of global trade. Mr. Hassan, former chairman of a Pakistan-based economic advisory group, stated that if this vital artery were suddenly disrupted, the impact would be immediate and severe, affecting nearly every aspect of life, especially in major industrial economies in East Asia like Japan, South Korea, and in the long term, China. According to him, tensions around the Strait of Hormuz have pushed the world to a new level of escalation. In a worst-case scenario, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait could be next, triggering a chain reaction potentially spreading to the Strait of Malacca. The mere prospect of this shipping lane being blocked is enough to alarm markets, as Asia could lose access to most alternative supplies outside the Gulf region upon which it depends. In a related development, Ali Akbar Velayati, advisor on international affairs to Iran's supreme leader, warned on X that the era of security imposed from across the ocean has ended. Velayati wrote, "Now, not only is security in the Strait of Hormuz and Malacca guaranteed by our strength and that of our strategic partners, but security in Bandar is also in the hands of our forces. Any disruptive action will be met with a chain of retaliatory responses." Advanced U.S. UAVs are being shot down repeatedly, exposing critical weaknesses against Iranian air defense. Recently, a senior Iranian officer who reportedly shot down a U.S. F-35 fighter jet that violated Iranian airspace said, "We have completely destroyed a Lockheed Martin technology. The legend of stealth fighters is over." The officer also noted that his colleagues are on the battlefield around the clock hunting enemy targets. Furthermore, in the Fury campaign, a large number of U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drones have been downed at an alarming rate. At least 24 have been lost since the conflict began, equivalent to about $720 million US. A number that demonstrates the severity of the damage. However, the issue is not just about money. These losses are exposing a core weakness of the Reaper when operating in an environment with modern air defense, something it has almost never faced before. First introduced in 2007, the MQ-9 Reaper was designed for long-range reconnaissance, surveillance, and precision strike missions. For over 20 years, it operated effectively in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, where the enemy had virtually no significant air defense capability. Along with the MQ-1 Predator, the Reaper became an airborne target hunting machine, loitering for tens of hours to track and attack. But the conflict with Iran is entirely different. Unlike previous military forces, Iran possesses a layered air defense network including radar, surface-to-air missiles, and electronic warfare systems. In this environment, the very advantages that once made the Reaper excel have become critical weaknesses. First is speed. The Reaper flies quite slowly, only about 480 kilometers per hour, not much faster than a small civilian aircraft. This makes it an easy target for air defense missile systems. Second is its large radar signature, making it difficult to hide from modern detection systems. Finally, its predictable flight path. The Reaper often loiters over an area for a long time to conduct surveillance, inadvertently giving the enemy an opportunity to track and lock on. As a result, most of the downed UAVs were shot down by air defense missiles, especially in heavily defended areas like Isfahan, Shiraz, or unclear location. Some cases also involved electronic jamming, base attacks, or even friendly fire. Nevertheless, the MQ-9 Reaper is not yet obsolete. It remains the backbone of the U.S. intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance (ISR) network, providing persistent tracking capabilities that few platforms can replace. As the number of Reapers is rapidly depleted, the U.S. surveillance range is shrinking, forcing them to rely more on other systems. Replacing the Reaper is also not simple. Each unit takes 2 to 3 years to produce, while supply chains and procurement rates are limited. In the short term, the U.S. may have to pull UAVs from reserve forces to offset losses. The lesson from this campaign is clear: the Reaper was built for one-sided conflicts where the enemy could barely fight back. When it steps into an environment with modern air defenses like Iran's, it becomes highly vulnerable. The Gulf calculates ways to bypass the Strait of Hormuz to avoid dependence. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz has been seen as the world's energy market's lifeline, through which about 20% of crude oil and a significant portion of LNG must pass. The mere threat of disruption instantly triggers market reactions: price hikes, soaring transport costs, and tightening supply chains. Notably, Hormuz's power lies not in a complete blockade. The mere risk of it being controlled is enough to create immense pressure. This factor makes Hormuz an exceptionally sensitive geopolitical tool, a choke point less than 40 kilometers wide that can directly impact economies thousands of kilometers away. In the context of prolonged regional conflict, near-total dependence on a single route has exposed increasingly clear risks. Less noticed, since 2012, the United Arab Emirates has operated an Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline about 380 kilometers long across the desert, with a capacity of about 1.5 million barrels per day, completely bypassing Hormuz. This is not just an energy project but a strategic decision to reduce dependence on this choke point. Similarly, Saudi Arabia has operated a pipeline from its eastern oil-producing region to the Red Sea port of Yanbu since the 1980s, with a capacity of nearly 5 million barrels per day. Both systems are currently not operating at full design capacity, meaning there is still significant room to redirect energy flows away from Hormuz. The notable point is that Gulf countries did not build these routes at the request of outsiders but out of their own self-interest. When revenue depends heavily on energy exports, placing the entire system on a single choke point is an unacceptable strategic risk. That's why bypass options have long been prepared but not yet fully utilized. In theory, expanding these pipelines could significantly diminish Hormuz's role. It wouldn't require completely eliminating the route. Redirecting just 25 to 30% of traffic would be enough to reduce the leverage from controlling the strait. Then Hormuz would still be important but no longer absolutely decisive. However, this solution is not without limitations. Saudi Arabia's pipeline, while avoiding Hormuz, leads to the Red Sea, and ships must then pass through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, another choke point with its own risks. Recent developments show this area could become a new source of instability, significantly reducing the benefits of bypassing Hormuz. Meanwhile, the UAE model, ending at Fujairah port on the Gulf of Oman, is considered more effective as it does not require passing through a second choke point. Yet, fixed pipelines are also vulnerable targets in conflicts, requiring massive investment in protection, redundancy, and backup to ensure continuous operation. Another often overlooked factor is liquefied natural gas, LNG. Unlike crude oil, LNG is difficult to transport by pipeline on a large scale due to complex technical requirements. This means countries like Qatar still depend significantly on Hormuz, indicating that the energy equation cannot be fully solved by pipeline infrastructure alone. In a context of potential regional instability, relying on military solutions to ensure freedom of navigation always carries escalation risks. Conversely, investing in alternative infrastructure is seen as a less confrontational but more effective long-term approach. Israel closes Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt. The Palestinian Border and Crossing Authority in the Gaza Strip announced that Israel has closed the Rafah crossing between the territory and Egypt, thereby disrupting the transfer of patients and wounded individuals abroad for treatment. The authority did not give a reason for Israel's decision. Hamas immediately criticized the move. In a video message, spokesperson Hazem Qassem accused the closure of the Rafah crossing as part of Israel's intention to tighten its siege on the Gaza Strip. Qassem stated that travel restrictions, limited aid, and continued attacks are part of Israel's systematic policy. The Hamas spokesperson urged mediators and guarantors of the ceasefire to intervene and pressure Israel to lift the blockade. The Palestinian Red Crescent recorded that about 700 patients have left Gaza for treatment abroad since the Rafah crossing was partially reopened on February 2. According to the organization, over 18,000 patients and wounded individuals are still awaiting transport. In another move, the Gaza Civil Defense said 2 Palestinians were killed and at least 10 others wounded in Israeli airstrikes targeting police checkpoints, refugee camps, evacuees, and gatherings across the Palestinian territory. Earlier, the Gaza Health Ministry confirmed that hospitals had received 2 bodies and treated 22 wounded individuals in the previous 24 hours. The death toll since the ceasefire took effect on October 10, 2025, has reached 777, with 2,193 others wounded. 7 European countries speak out on economic sanctions against Israel. Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Álvarez said Madrid will push for stronger measures within the EU bloc to end Israel's military campaign in Gaza. He acknowledged recent humanitarian aid agreements between the EU and Israel but said they are insufficient compared to the scale of the crisis. According to Russia's TASS news agency, 7 European Union member states have called for imposing economic sanctions on Israel. The move comes ahead of a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Luxembourg, seen as an opportunity for member states to continue discussing a common stance on Israel. According to the EU Observer, France and Sweden have joined 5 other EU countries in pushing for the sanctions proposal. The content is outlined in a draft letter prepared by Sweden for the ministerial meeting. One of the proposed measures is a ban on products originating from Israeli settlements. This issue has long been debated in EU-Israel relations, particularly regarding trade policy and international law. According to sources, the proposal aims to increase economic pressure on Israel through trade instruments. However, the level of support within the EU is not uniform among member states. According to the European Council, over the past 2 years, the body has repeatedly discussed the issue of economic sanctions against Israel. Still, to date, the EU has not reached the necessary consensus to pass concrete measures. The Luxembourg meeting is expected to continue considering this proposal. However, the likelihood of reaching a common decision in the short term remains unclear, as member states still need more time to align their views. Cuba confirms talks with U.S. in Havana. Alejandro Garcia Dentoro, Deputy Director General for U.S. Affairs at Cuba's Foreign Ministry, confirmed that a Cuban delegation recently held talks in Havana with a U.S. delegation, amidst continued high tensions between the 2 countries over Washington's energy embargo against the Caribbean nation. The U.S. delegation included Assistant Secretaries of State, while the Cuban delegation included Deputy Foreign Minister-level representatives. According to Mr. Garcia, the Cuban official in charge of U.S. relations, the top priority in the discussions was the goal of ending the oil embargo. Washington has not confirmed the information from Havana. If confirmed, this would be the first time a U.S. government aircraft has landed in Cuba since 2016, when Barack Obama visited in an effort to open relations. Earlier, the AUS news agency, citing a well-informed source, reported that officials in the Trump administration held several meetings in Havana on April 10 with the Cuban side. Mr. Garcia said the discussion was conducted in a respectful and professional manner. Tensions between Cuba and the U.S. increased after Washington launched a raid to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in January. Venezuela is Cuba's main oil supplier.